an entomologist at Virginia Tech, and we're here on a cutover site that was recently cut for timber. And this is an area that seems to be preferred by fire ants. So particularly in southeast Virginia, these cutover sites, and it's a good place to find fire ants. They particularly like to show up along roadways or along tree stumps or places like that. So this is the site we're at, has a lot of cutover stumps, and at the base of a good number of them you can find fire ant mounds. Now, why is this important in a logging forestry situation? There's kind of two issues there in fire ants. One is that this is a worker hazard. It's a potential for their stings can be an issue for a lot of people, and so it's a worker protection issue on that regard, to make workers aware and be careful they're not being stung by the fire ant. The other two is this is a quarantine insect, so this is an insect that if it's moved, it could be an issue. So the other issue is to kind of make sure that you're not moving the fire ants with you when you're going from site to site. So the fire ants here in southeast Virginia are all single queen colonies. So you find small mounds next to these stumps, and in those mounds there'll be a single queen down in there and several thousand workers, and they're foraging about too. When you disturb the mound, you can see the ants start moving around very, very actively. So this is when equipment comes through. It can pick up soil, skidders, earth-moving equipment, landing gear in trucks, and also logs too. Anything can move some soil and potentially move fire ants, and that's the main issue for the quarantine. But then when you got workers coming through here doing planting or things like that too, they definitely need to be aware of the fire ants, keep an eye out, be aware of where they are, what they look like, what the mounds look like, and avoid being stung. Individual sting reactions can vary. Some people it's mild, itchy, unpleasant. Some people can have a very severe reaction. So it's good to know what you got and be aware of it and try to avoid it if all possible. The fire ants have a life cycle where they are pretty much in the winter. They're not terribly active. They're down. They're not in dormancy stage. They're down inside the mound, not moving. When it starts to become spring, then they start becoming more active. You get days above the 73 degrees, and you start getting flights of fire ants. So we're not quite here early May to the flight time for fire ants, but that'll be happening really, really soon. Rapid growth of fire ants during the spring, and into the late spring and into the summer. In that case, the mound's increasing in size quite a bit. They're foraging for the honeydew dropped by aphids, as well as protein of dead insects and live insects that they can find. And when they make those flights, that's when the new colonies are established. So that's the other way they spread, is when you get the flights and the queens land next to a log and start their whole new colony. They have a very low success rate. Thousands and thousands of queens will be coming out of a colony, but only less than 1% will actually be successful in making a particular mound. Then once that's established, then they'll start foraging and working from there. But these colonies can last 3 to 5 years or so, and they really like areas with quite a bit of sunlight. So these cutover areas are places that tend to be very, very, very good for ants. They're very prevalent. Fire ants are very prevalent in these areas. And so if you get an area that's a typical sort of forested, wooded area, you're very unlikely to see fire ants. But once it's cut over, it kind of opens up, and the fire ants do spread into there. And so that's the main thing with the biology, is that a typical woodland is not a great place for fire ants. But once it's cut over, the habitat is really good, and that's when you start finding the fire ants. So the lookalike ant for the red imported fire ant would be what's known as the Allegheny mound ant. And this is also a red and black ant, and it is a little bit bigger. So the red imported fire ant is about 1/8 of an inch or less in length, and the Allegheny mound ant is around 1/4 of an inch or so in length. Allegheny mound ant, it bites and it injects formic acid into the bite. So it is a very painful bite, and people often think it's a sting. But the fire ant is a little different animal in that it actually uses a stinger, and when it stings you, it's a venom type thing. So that's why people can have a very severe reaction to fire ants. Allegheny mound ants, coming back to them, they're very common throughout Virginia. They make very large mounds. The mounds can be 1 foot to 3 feet in diameter, fairly large, 6 inches to 18 inches in height. pretty big sized mounds. And so that's one of the ones people will send in to us, and you know, they think, oh, this is a fire ant. And we don't mind if you bring us Allegheny mound ant, because one, it's not imported fire ant. Two, you have the right search image. So you got that red and black, the mound builder, painful bite, fortunately not a sting for the Allegheny mound ant. But just kind of coming back to the red imported fire ant, their sting is a venom. It's similar to what you get from wasps and hornets and bees, so that's why it's quite a bit different as far as people's reaction to it.
Hi, I'm Chamberlin. I'm the Forest Health Program Manager with the Virginia Department of Forestry. We're here looking at the red imported fire ants. As Eric mentioned, this isn't a pest that you're going to find in the middle of the woods, but when you have a cutover or a field edge or a road, that's where you'll tend to find them. So it is important that the Department of Forestry knows where red imported fire ants are in Virginia and how we can help be a part of the solution and stop the spread. They are a regulated pest in Virginia, meaning there is a quarantine here in Southeast Virginia. And so anyone that could potentially be moving the red imported fire ant from inside the quarantine to outside the quarantine should stop and do an inspection. And that's especially true of anyone involved in a logging job, logging equipment, skidders, anyone working on the site could potentially move loose, uncompacted soil. And so if that's the case, it's important that you inspect that equipment for the loose, uncompacted soil and try to remove it. And so we have a checklist specifically for loggers that may be working in areas with the red imported fire ant. And this just tells you what to do to inspect your equipment for that material, and then how to go about removing it. And it can be as simple as sweeping it off or using a power washer to wash it off. Here you can see the quarantine in Virginia. The quarantine was established in 2009 for just a handful of counties, York County, Suffolk, Chesapeake, Virginia Beach. However, in 2019, that quarantine was expanded as the red imported fire ant is confirmed in other counties as well. So added in 2019 was the city of Emporia, Franklin, and then also the counties of Brunswick, Isle of Wight, Greensville, Mecklenburg, and Southampton. So this is an important map to be familiar with if you work in the area. And if you are concerned about working in an area where the fire ant has been confirmed, please get in touch with VDACS, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So if you're working in an area that has fire ants, and it's just a one-time event that you happen to be moving regulated articles outside of the quarantine, contact VDACS and they'll probably be able to send an inspector over to do the inspection. But if this is something that's going to be a regular occurrence, moving regulated articles to and from across the quarantine line, then you'll need to contact VDACS and apply for a compliance agreement, which would allow you to do your own inspections.
So we have here what would be a semi-typical fire ant mound. It's in the cutover area. It's near a stump. It's a little bit raised. This particular site had a lot of standing water back in the winter. This area is a little bit raised, and so this seems to be something that the fire ants like. So you kind of have two things you need to do here. One is see if it's active, and that's just a matter of just poking with a stick and see if the ants come out. Be very careful, they'll climb up the stick, you're going to end up with a sting. If you're not sure, we kind of already talked about Allegheny mound ant versus red imported fire ant. Very carefully collect a sample into a jar. You can just kind of scoop some up, put a little bit of alcohol in there, take it to your extension office or visit your county forester. Make sure for sure that you have fire ants. So that's kind of the key to this, is that these particular treatments are designed for fire ants only. So identification is one step, and then once you come across this and you know pretty sure it's fire ant, make sure it's got some activity. We just kind of poke it with a stick. We see a lot of ants coming out right now, so we know they're active. There are two different baits labeled for use in Virginia. They're in the Virginia Pest Management Guide, and they're listed as far as the rates and that sort of thing too. The main thing in the baits is that you use the measured amount that's on the label, because too much of the bait acts as a repellent. And what this is, the ants think of this as food. This is a bait that has some food qualities for them, and then they'll take it down inside and feed it to the queen. So again, single queen colony, so all it takes is just one chunk of bait getting down to the queen, and it does a pretty good job. This is one of 2 steps you need to do, and this is the bait. You need to do a follow-up. You may have to do like a granular insecticide as a follow-up when you monitor for it there too. So you can measure out the bait, again, based on what the label says for a particular mound, and number of ounces per mound. You just carefully, kind of low tech, you sprinkle it around the mound. Get pretty good coverage around the edge where they do foraging. So again, they could be taking this down to the bait. I already see some of the ants are calling some of the bait chunks with them. So this is already going to work, and they're doing the job here. Follow up monitoring a couple weeks, see if you got the ants. So a whole big cutover area like this, you're not really going to need to treat the whole area, maybe, but again, depending on worker safety. But particular areas, where workers are congregating, where logs are being loaded, these sorts of things are all places you're going to need to do some treatment too. So that's treating in a nutshell. That's the first step. The 2-step method that we're talking, the Texas 2-step. The first step is the bait treatment. The second would be a contact insecticide.
How long does it take for the 2-step process to work?
This should work in a week or 2. You should be able to come back.
So that's when you should come back for the second
zero
treatment.
Activity at that time. But you're going to find that about 80 to 90% of the mounds respond. The bait treatments work very well. At a very low number, you actually have to come back and do the contact granular insecticide.
What are some incorrect ways that people like to try to treat ants?
Well, there's a lot of home remedies, and the internet is full of them. If you really are looking for the organic, non-insecticide way, boiling water or steam actually does a pretty good job. You're looking at about 60 to 80% control with steam. So if you have a power washer with your equipment, it might not be a bad idea to be washing all the soil off of your equipment with a power washer. If your power washer has an attachment to get a heat on there, you can get hot water in there. You can boil up hot water and pour it on. It does a really good job. Now, I'm kind of loath to mention some of the other kind of methods of things like grits, baking soda, or things like that. They just don't work.
Be sure to join us at 12:15 on June the 24th, where Karen Snape will take us beyond the basics of tree ID. Have a great week.